Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio. You should check out all of their great shows, Real GM Radio, B-Ball Breakdown, everything that's going on over there. We've got you covered for the NBA playoffs. Today's show, though, going to be NBA draft-centric. We're going to talk to my good buddy Cole Zwicker from over at the Step Back, over at 16 Wins a Ring. We're going to talk about some of the news that happened today in terms of the NBA draft. We've got Grayson Allen and Nigel Williams-Goss making their decisions. We're going to talk about a couple guys that on the wing that we agree and disagree on in Jayson Tatum and Miles Bridges. And then we're going to talk about a little bit of stuff at the end. We'll see where it goes. But first, I would like to remind you, please rate, review, and subscribe to the Game Theory Podcast on iTunes. It really helps us get our ratings up throughout those rankings. The higher we are in the rankings, the more people who listen to the show. So I would really appreciate it if you did that. It's just an easy, simple way to support the show, and it would just mean a world to me. But how's it going, Cole? Let's get you in the fold here.
Doing really well, man. It's the best time of the year, NBA playoffs. Going from watching mostly high school and college. I put akin on Twitter the other day to Jennifer Lawrence kind of appearing in the middle of a sleet storm with the NBA playoffs. So I'm ready to go, man. It's a great time of year.
Well, I kind of told you what we were going to talk about before the podcast started. But we're going to totally go off schedule here real quick. You were at Hoop Summit, I know, up in Portland. And I wanted to talk to you about, what were some of your impressions there? I've chatted about Hoop Summit a little bit on the show, but I don't know that I've talked to anyone for the Game Theory Podcast that was up there. So what were kind of your impressions of the week?
Michael Porter Jr. obviously stood out as far as his polished shooting. I mean, you can't really appreciate someone shooting unless you watch them really close up. You get a better feel on the rotation, like specific mechanics. I think that kid can shoot the hell out of the ball. When you have that intersection with his athleticism, he's someone who didn't really stand out a ton during the game, but during the week of practices consistently, he was just always scoring in scrimmages, really advanced footwork. So I think he had a lot of hype coming in, obviously, as a number one player in his high school class, and I definitely think he held to form. But my overall takeaway is just next year's big class is going to be fantastic. DeAndre Ayton obviously didn't go to Hoop Summit. I think he declined an invite for his second time around. But Wendell Carter, he's really underrated as far as skill goes. Really good passer. He has that physical build. He's like 257 pounds. And, of course, Mo Bamba, who really fluid guarding in space. Obviously, the elite length, 7'9" wingspan would be the number one wingspan in the league. So the big class, if you want to invest in bigs outside of, I'd argue, Zach Collins in this class in terms of fives, I would wait until next year because I didn't even include guys like Mitchell Robinson, who's the athletic freak. So, yeah, I mean, the five class next year is going to be pretty incredible.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the 2018 draft, at the top at least. I don't think it's going to be as deep as this class is, but you mentioned a lot of the guys at the top there. Like Michael Porter, to me, he is, he's like, I'm really high on Jayson Tatum, as we'll talk about later in this podcast. To me, he's bigger, more fluid, better shooting Jayson Tatum, which is an incredible prospect, right?
Yeah, definitely. He's bigger. He's more athletic. I mean, he just has a lot more. I think he's a better version of Tatum. Maybe not. I don't know about his floor game yet. We haven't seen enough of Porter, how he dribbles in tight areas, how he handles pick and roll, and his general feel level. Those are all question marks that we need answered at Missouri next year. But, yeah, I would say at the same stage, he looks exactly what you described.
Yeah, and then Mo Bamba. Mo Bamba's a guy that I think is not going to be awesome in a college basketball setting next year. Like, his offensive game just kind of isn't polished, and I think that, like, a lot of the less developed college basketball minds, we'll call them, like the intelligentsia that talks about college basketball, is going to wonder, why is Mo Bamba, he was a top 3 recruit in the country, why is he not scoring 15 points a game and dominating? He's so athletic, he's so strong, he's so fluid and can move. Why is he not scoring more? Why is he not producing more? But he's still very raw offensively from what I've seen, and he's still going to take some time on that end. But defensively, I can't remember a prospect that had as high a ceiling as he has.
Yeah, it's really Rudy Gobert, right? That seems like kind of a lazy comparison, but when you compare the outlier length, I think Bamba's actually a little bit more mobile than Gobert is in space. Mm-hmm. So when you build from there, I think that Bamba, he's at least fluid enough to rim run. He did that throughout the week of Hoop Summit. He's coordinated. He can catch balls in transition. He's got pretty good hands. So as a baseline, I think he can be a functional offensive player. But right now, you're basically looking for him to pick and roll, dive, and just be like a garbage man around the basket. But he could emerge over time.
Yeah, a lot of people have kind of talked about him potentially being able to shoot the ball a little bit. And I get it from a touch perspective. Like, he doesn't have bad touch out that distance. but the shot is so slow. It's not very functional. I mean, maybe at some point, once he kind of, improves upon the mechanics a little bit, I can see that being, a slight weapon. You're still going to want him diving to the rim. You're still going to want him taking advantage of that elite length and athleticism around the rim. But, I think we're a little bit, from what I've seen, at least some people are a little bit too excited about the jump shot. Did you kind of get that impression?
Definitely a little bit. He looked pretty functional shooting in warm-ups. He didn't make a lot of them, and he's not like Porzingis where he's going to come off the screen, set his feet, and shoot a three. That's never going to happen for him.
Right.
But
he's like a Willie Cauley-Stein shooter, right? Like everyone talks about how Willie Cauley-Stein can knock down threes in practice, and like how that could eventually translate to the game. Maybe, but he has a long way to go to get there. It takes a while to become a functional shooter.
Oh, absolutely. I think his upside is probably like spotting up from the corner or something on catch and shoots, really simple stuff. But it's at least within the realm of possibility for him. You can rule out a lot of bigs early on. Let's say this kid just can't shoot. He doesn't have the touch, doesn't have the form. And I don't feel that way with him. I think that it's, like you said, it's going to take a while, but it's within the realm of outcomes.
The two standouts that people talked about all week were Jared Vanderbilt and Jaren Jackson. In terms of not like on the elite end, but players who kind of exceeded expectations a little bit. Did you kind of feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a ton of Vanderbilt before this, so he had the best first practice of anybody at the Nike campus. Really excelled attacking closeouts. You can see his floor game. He has pretty nice feel. He can pass on the move. I would say right now he's the most likely in that class, outside of Miles Bridges, returning, of course, to be like a playmaking four type. He just has good feel, really tight handle at times. Like, he can navigate his way in traffic. He did that at one of the scrimmages. So his general feel level, the shooting is going to be the issue with him. He shot okay from a standstill over the week of practices, but I think he still has a slight hitch at the top at times. He uses a ton of arms in his shot. So I think his shot's far away, but overall, like, he has a very workable package. With Jaren Jackson, you didn't see it. A lot of versatility. He didn't really handle the ball like he does. He could dribble in high school. Like, he could run like a grab and go break and like hit shooters on the wings and stuff. I'm not sure that's going to translate, but what he does have is that elite length. His measurables are actually pretty good for a 5, and I don't know if a lot of people saw him that way coming into the week, but he definitely has the coordination, the skill level. He can finish with either hand. Like, he killed the world team in the game on the boards, finished with either hand and stuff like that. So I think he has a lot of foundation to work with. It's just I don't see the vertical explosiveness. He's not great laterally moving in space. So there are some concerns, but I think that generally he is one person that definitely stood out.
Yeah, we'll talk about the way that Michigan State kind of utilizes players later on when we talk about Bridges. But, to me, I think that they're going to be best off utilizing him as a 5, but we'll get there in a minute. The first thing that I wanted to talk about before we got sidetracked by Hoop Summit, and honestly, I think I do want to go back to Hoop Summit for a second here and ask you about the international kids, because there were a few kids there that are going to be in this 2017 NBA draft as of right now, particularly Kosta Mushidi, Bariza Simonic, and Isaiah Hartenstein, all three of which I believe have declared, and if they haven't yet, I thought I saw that Hartenstein had declared. I know the other two have. Do you have any impressions of them in terms of whether or not you think they can be potential NBA players down the road?
I think that all of them have a shot. I don't think that the ceiling outcomes are really that high. I don't see any of them as lottery picks. Hartenstein, he wasn't that impressive. Really what you see on film is what you get in person. He's pretty straightforward. He's good vision. He tries to be a good passer, and I appreciate that. But the decision-making is just really wild at times. Like, he throws really off-target passes.
Wild outlet passes.
Really wild outlet passes. He handles the ball in transition pretty well, but he just ends up throwing the ball to the other team sometimes. It's like, what are you doing, man? But high skill level, really, really great build. He doesn't have an avenue to score right now. So that's the issue with him. Like, I don't know how he's going to score in the half court, and I don't think he protects the rim well enough to be a full-time 5, even though he has the size. So I think he's a little bit away. Mushidi played well in front of executives. Like, he really thrived in that Thursday scrimmage in front of everybody because he just made shots, and that's really the deal with him. If he shoots well, he has the length and the frame to defend pretty decently. So I just don't see any shake to his offensive game. He's not somebody who's going to create off the dribble very much. So it depends on how you value him. And then Simonic, he's a guy who was really good in drills. Like, when he was working with the perimeter players, he would come off screens at full speed, and he could just plant like 28-footers. And he looked so good, effortless. He doesn't drop the ball, it just goes straight up. But he just doesn't translate to a 5-on-5 setting. Like, he probably didn't have one good scrimmage the entire week. And then in the game, he looked absolutely rattled. Like, he couldn't dribble. He turned the ball over, I think, 3 times and ended up getting yanked. So I don't see any impact guys from that class outside of, or I should say from the Hoop Summit International team, outside of RJ Barrett, of course, who was 2 years younger and was basically killing people in scrimmages. So he's the one high upside guy of that general grouping. But for the most part, like Nick Richards, he's fine. I think he's going to be probably like a third big on a team. He's got the athleticism, he's got the fluidity, good touch. But outside of those two guys, I didn't really see a whole lot.
Yeah, Simonich is a guy that I had super high coming into the year. He was legitimately getting minutes at Red Star as an 18-year-old last year. He went and destroyed Basketball Without Borders in 2016. But the one thing that you'd always heard about him was the mental approach to the game being a question, because he doesn't really take adversity well on the floor. And everything that you just told me pretty much fits directly into everything that NBA scouts and NBA executives who have seen him over in Serbia and over in the Adriatic League for years have been telling me about him. So that had to be a little bit of a disappointing confirmation bias, I guess. And in terms of Hartenstein, I guess that, you know, there are going to be a lot of comparisons to him to Nikola Jokic, I feel like, because he can dribble a lot. He has the 6'11", 7-foot size now. You know, his passing is theoretically awesome. Like you said, he gets a little wild with it, but he has the vision. Like, he has that same gift in terms of seeing things on the floor. It's just whether or not you should decide to do them that makes Jokic so special, and it makes everyone that has that kind of high skill level so special. The problem is that comparing anyone to Nikola Jokic is just going to be setting them up for failure in a way, because anyone that is that low level of an athlete who has just that preternatural basketball IQ, Hartenstein has really good basketball IQ, and you can tell he has great vision, but you have to, if you're going to have his game and have his athleticism levels and everything, it has to be in the 0.001% of basketball IQ in terms of where you are among the elite. And even if Hartenstein's at the top 5 percentile of basketball IQ in terms of that, and top 5 percentile of skill, it kind of limits what his overall impact can be. Is that right?
I mean, there's a huge difference, like you said, between being really good at something and being outlier good at something. And yeah. Jokic is an outlier decision maker. If you look at his assist to turnover ratios internationally, he was a wizard, all-time generational kind of 5 talent as far as passing goes. I don't even think that Hartenstein's on the same level as far as vision. He's a good passer. I don't know if he's a great one, but you have to delineate between passing and decision making, because that's a really important separator. You have a guy like Lonzo Ball who's elite at both, and you have a guy like D'Angelo Russell who has elite vision, not elite decision making. So you always have to make that distinction, and I think what you said was spot on.
Yeah. Let's move on, though. Let's talk about Grayson Allen. I would be remiss if I did not ask the question, is Duke back now that Grayson Allen has decided to return for his senior year?
I don't know about that, but he at least gives Wendell Carter, the incoming class, more Gary Trent, more spacing on the floor, another creator. At the college level, he's going to make his teammates better. He's improved as a playmaker. So, I mean, it's a good move for Duke because he's really conducive to winning basketball in college. I just don't know what to do beyond that as far as pro prospects go.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about. What do you think of his pro prospects? Because some people around the league that I've talked to are pretty high on him, think that he could be an end of the first round pick. Most people, though, tend to fall into whenever he declares he will be a second round pick. His game, there are enough people out there that like him, but I don't think that anyone necessarily likes him above number 25 overall or something like that.
Yeah, for me, he's a second-round pick. I'm not really crazy about him. He's not just a shooter. He can play make a little bit. I don't know how well it's going to translate. He can slash. He can handle the ball respectably well. I just don't think he's going to be able to defend anybody. You saw that against Josh Jackson earlier this year, where Jackson was just beating him in space like a drum. And, he's not going to be able to guard. So, generally, when I have a shooter on the wing, mostly he's going to drive his value through shooting, I think. And if he's not going to defend, I tend to devalue those guys, especially guys that can't shoot a high frequency and a high volume proficiency off screens. So I'm a little lower on him. He's not somebody I'm going to invest a lot of capital in, but I can definitely see him getting drafted, of course.
Well, the cool thing with Grayson is that I don't think he's just a shooter. I think that you're right in that his ability to space the floor is where he's going to derive his value. But he has a lot of kind of professional moves in terms of the way that he can shimmy in and out of the lane, either where he has really good shoulder fakes, or he has really good shoulder dips to where he can create space, and he's really good at attacking closeouts. So I think that you're right in terms of floor spacing is going to be how he derives his value. But I do like his overall offensive skill set as well in the modern NBA as an off-ball too.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's kind of the same thing with Kennard, who has, I think, better ball skills. He's more proficient.
I think Luke's just kind of different, you know?
Yeah, they're not the same guy, for sure. I'm just saying, like, you're going to derive most of your value from shooting, but they can do more than just that off the dribble.
Yeah, and like, Luke's just a better player. You know what I mean? Like, that's all there is to it. Like, he's a better passer, way better decision maker, better shooter, has way more in terms of those little shoulder shimmies. He has way more, change of direction, change of pace than Grayson does, particularly in terms of pace. So, we'll see what happens with Grayson. I think that he would be helped by getting a guy like Trayvon Duval there who can really make plays for him and allow him to move off ball a little bit more. But we'll see if that ends up being the case.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the right way to look at it.
Let's move on and talk about his teammate, though. Jayson Tatum is a guy that I've been super high on throughout the process, and I think part of it is, I talk to people around the NBA. They love his work ethic. They love his, ability to get into the gym and work hard and really trying to improve his game, as well as his high skill level. He's 6'8" with a 7-foot wingspan. He can shoot the ball a little bit. He has incredible touch throughout the mid-range. He can create his own shot in a way that many players can't create their own shot at 18, 19 years old. So I have it number 2 on my board. I think that part of that might be more that I might be a little bit more down on Lonzo Ball than a lot of people are. But where do you fall on Jayson Tatum? Because knowing you, I can see you having a lot of questions about his skill set translating to the next level.
I'm in the middle. I think that he does enough things. Like, I don't think he's an elite passer. He probably tops out at about average for a wing passer. Mm-hmm. But he does just enough to where I think that he could one day be like a primary wing scorer. I'm not sure if he's ever going to be that, but he at least has that high ceiling outcome enough to where I would consider him taking him at number 4 overall. Like you said, really polished, advanced offensive game for his age. Incredible footwork in the mid-post. His ability to create space just off triple threat, like jab steps and stuff, he can pretty much get a shot whenever he wants. I don't think that's necessarily – a lot of people view that as a bad thing. Like, he's going to be a ball stopper. He needs to stop the ball in the mid-post. I don't think that has to be the case. I think he can play in a team construct. If he can shoot threes, he can still attack closeouts very well. So there's a lot to work with there. It's just 2 things I have against him. The first thing is finishing. He's not an explosive athlete. Yeah. He doesn't have a ton of craft, even though he has a pretty good first step. I actually really like his first step out of triple threat. But he doesn't have that kind of Gordon Hayward kind of herky-jerky style craft around the rim. So that's one issue. And 2, I think that he probably tops out at maybe average to slightly above average defensively at the next level, just because I don't trust his hip flexibility. Like, he's not a stiff at all, but he can't really sink that low in his stance. And I do think the block and steal numbers that he's put up this year do overshadow a little bit his defensive deficiencies guarding in space. I don't think he's great laterally. He's okay. But you can do a lot with an isolation scorer at times, like at the end of the shot clock, who is not a liability defensively. Like, if he looks like he can come into a playoff environment and he's not going to be a liability, and that has value.
Yeah, so let's just kind of put some numbers to the first concern there in terms of what he was around the basket this year. 65th percentile in terms of finishing around the basket on non-post-up plays in the half court. He shot 57.3% there, according to Synergy. Those are fine numbers. They're not great numbers for an NBA wing prospect. Like Cole said, he does not have that elite level explosiveness. And if you kind of watch him around the rim, and if you watch him whenever he's slashing to the rim, I totally agree with what Cole said in terms of he doesn't have a plan of attack once you take away his primary option, right? Like, Gordon Hayward can figure out a way to finish despite not being a great athlete. He has a second move once you stop him initially. Jayson Tatum doesn't have that second move yet. That's my concern. Some guys develop it, some guys don't.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think that's a better way to phrase what I was trying to say, is that he doesn't have like secondary moves if you take away that initial drive. But even if you don't take away that initial drive, he just still struggles to finish over length at times. And I just don't know how much he contort around the rim. With, like, you can see this with like this different position, but like Markelle Fultz, you can see how much he can bend and kind of contort his body. And that makes a big difference when you're not an elite level athlete. Finishing over NBA length and size at the rim is hard. Most people think it's like, oh, you get more spacing at the NBA level, but the people you actually go against at the rim in those one-on-one battles are very vastly superior to college players for the most part. So that's my one issue with his overall creation as far as self-creation.
Well, I think that one interesting aspect of him is he is a long jumper more than he's a high jumper, right? Like he has those really long limbs, and those long legs really help him create space. You mentioned the hips, for instance. He has stiff hips, but he also has kind of high hips, I think. Yeah. And whenever he is going toward the rim, he kind of takes off a little bit too early, I think, often, and it limits his ability to contort in the air. Like whenever you see Markelle Fultz, for instance, Markelle is also a long jumper in that way, but he utilizes his, kind of center of gravity a little bit better, and it allows him to contort in the air and find a way to finish creatively whenever he's in those situations. But having said that, there are advantages to having those kind of high hips. For instance, one of them is that on step backs, he creates more space on step backs than any player in this draft. And that's a valuable skill to have, especially late in the shot clock. If you can create an efficient look late in the shot clock due to your ability to create space on a step-back jumper from 15 feet, 10 feet, maybe even out to 20 feet at some point in his case, that has a lot of value, and it's why he ended up as the, I believe, most efficient post scorer in the country based on people who had like at least 20 attempts or something, or like 25 attempts. It's because he has that ability to create space.
Absolutely, and I think he's probably, I want to say he's top 15 for high-volume wing creators over the last 10 years in isolation scoring as far as efficiency goes. So, I mean, he has the ability to get his own shot, and like you said, that does have immense value in the league because a lot of guys can't self-create, and he at least has enough in the toolbox to get his own shot, I believe, at the next level, create enough separation to where if he can pass well enough, I think that he could potentially have that Gordon Hayward kind of ceiling. There are differences, of course, but I think he could fulfill that. And, I mean, if you look at it that way, as far as ceiling outcome goes, that's a player that you want to invest in for sure.
See, I think his ceiling is even a little bit higher than that. I think his ceiling is like, maybe second or third best year of Carmelo Anthony ever good. Like,
oh, wow, okay.
Like, I really think that he can be a high-level efficient scorer. The key is going to be getting the jump shot around, and that's where the work ethic comes in, where you talk to people around the league, and they're like, this dude is one of the craziest hard workers that you'll find entering the draft at 18, 19 years old. And I think that says a lot about him and about his capacity to improve. Having said that, the one concern for me that probably sets him back a little bit lower than that Carmelo Anthony like ceiling maybe is that he does have the stiff hips in a way that Carmelo did not. Carmelo's, for all of his warts and everything, he had a lot of athletic fluidity in his younger age to where he was able to finish at the rim effectively. He was explosive vertically. He was able to do a lot that Jayson Tatum can't do, but Jayson Tatum's just a little bit more polished than Anthony is as well. So I don't know. Like, I'm really interested to see how his career goes because I'm someone who thinks that Carmelo Anthony at that part of his career could have been the best offensive player on a title team. He just never found the right pieces around him. So if you can get a guy like that, on the Celtics, say the Celtics end up with the number 2 overall pick, and you can go out and you miss on a Gordon Hayward and you end up with, someone like a Paul Millsap or something, and you can't go out and get a Paul George or whatever. I think Jayson Tatum would really fit their offense. I think that you throw him next to, a Jay Crowder, you throw him next to a Paul Millsap or something like that they could go out and get in free agency. That would really help him defensively because, again, I agree with you that he's not necessarily this elite level defender, but I think he can be like a Harrison Barnesy defender in where he doesn't have like the ass that Harrison Barnes does to be able to defend in the post a little bit better than you would expect from a guy that's 6'8" with a 7-foot wingspan and, doesn't have great hips, doesn't have a ton of fluidity. But I do think he's going to be able to switch in the same way that Barnes does. I think that he's at least, once he fills out his body, gets up to 225 pounds, maybe improves his lower body a little bit. He's not going to be a pushover in the post. And as the game evolves, I think that that's the key. You just can't be a pushover to where teams are able to automatically get deep position on you by posting bigger guys against you.
Yeah, I think that's in the playoffs. If you are a liability defensively, you will be exploited in some way. Like we see that with the small guards, Jeff Teague against the Cavs. I mean, that's an outlier example because he's smaller, but they just get ruthlessly attacked.
Well, look at Michael Beasley. Like we were just talking about the Bucks earlier. Michael Beasley just gets ruthlessly like destroyed in the playoffs because they're just going to go right at him every time defensively.
Yeah, and I don't see Tatum as that kind of liability. I think that was one of my initial points about his defense is I don't see him being a liability on that end. I just don't know if he's going to bring like a Jonathan Isaac kind of defensive value to the equation. I'm pretty confident he won't. But when you weigh that against the offense, I have a little bit more issues with him. If you're going to compare him to Carmelo in his prime, I think you've already differentiated the skill sets. It's just more so can he create enough offense for others as well? If you're going to be the number one player on a title team, most of those guys are, look at Giannis, for example. If he's going to emerge as that player, he's a playmaker. He can score at the rim, but he's facilitating offense. He's basically the primary initiator. And that's kind of why I have Josh Jackson ahead of Jayson Tatum, is because I don't think Josh is going to get there necessarily, but he has a better chance of getting to primary initiator level. He has better feel as a passer, better creator for others than Tatum does. I don't necessarily see Tatum getting to that point, if that makes sense.
Can Tatum get to a point where he's a Kawhi level distributor, though?
He could. Yeah, that's definitely possible. I mean
that's the low end, though, of like what you can be as far as a primary playmaker off the wing in terms of distribution skill.
Correct. It's Kawhi, kind of Kevin Durant, that kind of archetype, Paul George. You have to do it just well enough to be a functional kind of self-creator and creator for others. That's the baseline. I don't see him. He's not Ben Simmons, of course. He's not Giannis. He's not LeBron as far as vision and all that stuff goes. But if he can get to that threshold of playmaking for others, I think he can be really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll be interested to see what happens with him. If he could I think that his vision actually is pretty decent. It's just that it took him a long time early in this year to react to the speed of the game around him, and it limited what we saw of him in terms of his passing, because I think over the course of like the last maybe like 15 or 12 games that he played this year, he averaged like 3 assists per game, which is pretty solid for a college level like 30-minute a game player. It's just whether or not he can continue to translate that as the game gets even faster at the next level.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think he shows enough passing on the move. Like, he can hit guys when he drives to the basket, and that's not something you can just scoff at. Like, a lot of guys can't do that. Jonathan Isaac's more of like an outlet passer / hit guys in the post guy. He's not someone who's going to attack off the dribble and then dish off like a drop-off pass. I think Tatum's at least shown that ability, not to a Josh Jackson type level, right, but like at least to where you think he could functionally improve enough to be okay there.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Jackson in that regard, because I've always been a little bit more impressed with Jackson's passing in transition than I have been in terms of his passing in the half court. He can do it, and he can hit those little drop-off passes, but I don't know that he's going to do it consistently enough to where his passing skill needs to be far better than Tatum's passing skill, given the rest of their half-court offensive skill sets, to make him a remotely comparable player in terms of offensive skill, right? I don't know that he has that.
That's probably fair. I've seen a little bit more from him as a half-court passer, I think. I think he shows better vision. He keeps his head up pretty well. Scoring-wise, there's a lot of issues with Jackson that we can touch on if you want to, but for the most part, I think that's generally correct.
Well, it's interesting because I'm writing about Jackson at Vice for Thursday. So, where are you on Jackson right now? Because I think that one concern that I have is his defense this year was good when he was aggressive, but he was not allowed to be aggressive all that often at Kansas, just due to their roster constraints, due to the fact that they needed him on the floor as much as possible. And you saw, for instance, against West Virginia earlier in the year, West Virginia kind of torched him in pick and roll because he was just kind of forced to sit back. Do you think that the defense will become, maybe not all NBA level, but maybe just the level below all NBA level, as he's allowed to, maybe unleash himself a little bit more in the NBA on that end? Or do you think that the defense could continue to be a little bit more of a question mark than I think people are, kind of pointing out?
He gets a lot of Iguodala comparisons, and I don't think he's not as either as athletic or explosive laterally as Iguodala was in his prime. I think Iguodala was better laterally. You see kind of the limitations against Miles Bridges in that Michigan State game where Bridges got the corner on him a couple times. He's not elite quick. He kind of reminds me of MKG if he tries as hard as MKG. He doesn't have that strength. He doesn't have that elite length. But if you can fixate on just defense and facilitating some on offense in the half court. I think he can bring defensive value. I don't see him as like a generationally elite kind of defender. A lot of guys make Kawhi comparisons. He's not going to be Kawhi defensively. He's just not going to. But I think he can be a plus defender, maybe like a +2 defender on the wing, and just be like a formidable two-way player. But yeah, I think I see his defense more in the context of it's going to be valuable, and he can defend on like a playoff setting, but I don't see him as like a lockdown guy in the perimeter.
Well, the thing with Andre, too, is Andre always had those wild, broad shoulders, and like he kind of is just a little bit bigger in terms of frame than Jackson is, and it allows him to kind of switch all over the place. I think Jackson's going to be better off defending 2s and 3s in the NBA because he doesn't really have like this awesome frame to move down the lineup. He's very skinny, and his shoulders like aren't super broad.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of versatility as far as, I think that's the biggest knock on him potentially kicking to the 4 spot in the NBA and playing small ball 4, is that he doesn't have the build for that necessarily at all times. I mean, you're going to be able to use him there situationally for sure. Yeah. There'll be certain matchups where you can. But yeah, he doesn't have, like when you look at OG Anunoby, like he has like a legit monster frame, tree trunk legs. He's just built. He's really explosive laterally. He has that elite length. Like he has all the tools to be like an impact defender. That's why I think he's the best defensive player in this class.
Agreed.
But I don't see those same things for Jackson, but if he tries hard enough, like MKG stopped eating meat and he's like all lean now and stuff, and he's a functionally good defender. He's just not a great one.
Yeah, and of course, like Josh has way more game than Michael Kidd-Gilchrist ever did, like in terms of being able to handle the ball, create shots, pass, do things for teammates, everything like that. But I don't know. I have Jackson at, I think, number 3 or number 4 right now. I'm not saying like I'm super down on him. I just think there are a lot more questions, especially whenever you consider the off the floor stuff that happened earlier this year. And that's why I have Tatum over him. Like I just kind of trust Jayson Tatum's skill set a little bit more, and I trust the kid a little bit more.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Can we talk about Lonzo?
Do you want to talk about Lonzo?
Let's do it.
Okay.
I haven't really heard your opinion on him yet, so I'm very interested.
So my concern with Lonzo is that I think the shot's going to be fine at the next level in terms of like shooting from 3-point range. I think he's going to be able to finish at the rim well. I think that to be an elite NBA lead guard now, you need to be able to be a primary scorer. And I wonder if, and this is something that, people around that program living out here and stuff, like they tell me he can score in the mid-range with ease. I just haven't seen it yet, and I think that scoring in the mid-range is actually a really important thing for a lead guard to be able to possess. For instance, we see it with Stephen Curry, even though Stephen Curry just kind of bends the laws of basketball in a way. He still ends up taking a decent amount of mid-range jump shots. CJ McCollum is a guy, for instance, that not an elite athlete has kind of made an awesome killing throughout his NBA career in mid-range because even though he's an elite shooter and he's now turned into a solid finisher at the rim, that shot is just always there for lead guards. You can take that shot at so many different points in a game, and I think that teams are basically just going to play Lonzo, especially the fact that his shot going to the right side of the floor is going to be so problematic because he has to bring the ball back to his left side of his body, and I think it's just going to cause all sort of issues against elite defenders that can really disrupt with their hands particularly, that I think he's going to have a lot of trouble being a primary scoring threat in today's NBA. And if he's not a primary scoring threat, it's not that you can't be an elite guard if you're not a primary scoring threat, but I think it's way, way, way more difficult, and the margin of error is just so low for players like that. So that's why I have him at 4 right now. It's just because I just don't know how that part of his game works, and it's an essential part to being a lead guard in today's NBA.
Yeah, I think we're in lockstep on that. That's been kind of brushed under the rug by a lot of people this year, being like, oh, he's smart, he'll figure it out. But the worst thing you can do at the NBA level if you're an on-ball player is be predictable if you're not an elite athlete.
Yep.
Like Russell Westbrook, LeBron, those guys can get to their spots. It doesn't matter. But Lonzo, every single scouting report is going to be sit on his left hand, force him right, because we know he has to come back to his left to shoot off the dribble. I'm a little bit more bearish on his finishing ability, I think, on ball. His finishing numbers at the rim are incredible this year, but if you contextualize them, a lot of them are assisted. He's a fantastic cutter, which is one of the primary indicators of intelligence. Great off 2 feet in space. Yep. But I don't know how much contortion he has. He's pretty stiff on the hips as well. When you see him go up to elevate for layups, he looks really upright. I don't know how that's going to translate. With more strength, he can probably finish through contact. But I don't know what level he scores at an elite level, at the next level, outside of off-the-catch three-point shooting, which I definitely believe. If you view him from like a floor outcome as like a motion-type point guard, so say he goes to the Lakers, I think that's a perfect offensive fit for him because he's not the primary initiator every play. He plays within a team construct, kind of like UCLA. I think that's how you have to use him. If he's in that kind of setting, he can thrive. But if you want him to be James Harden, like spread 1-5 pick and roll, he's not going to be able to do that because NBA teams are going to do what they've done to point guards like that in the past. Like Steve Nash. The Lakers would make Steve Nash score 40 points sticking with shooters, and they did that. Philadelphia tried this against James Harden earlier this year, and he dropped 50 on him. I don't see Lonzo ever being able to score at that rate, and I think he's going to be played to score. So I think I agree with you. I have Lonzo 3 just because I think at the very least he's going to be a dynamite, like situational handler, off-ball player. But I do get the on-ball concerns are definitely legitimate, and that's why Fultz to me is a whole tier ahead of him.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Fultz, I think, is the number one player in this draft, like very clearly. Yeah, I mean, like I think that he's definitely a point guard. Like I've talked to now Danny LaRue, I've talked to someone else I had on. I think that Chris Stone actually and I talked about this last week in terms of him potentially being more of an off-ball player than an on-ball player, and now you've brought this up. I think that he's just going to be a point guard. Like, you know, like his ego, I think, is going to like be to where he wants to be a point guard. And I know that, like, you know, he was able to play off ball at points this year with Aaron Holiday and with, you know, Bryce Alford occasionally taking over, but not really. It really is just whenever they played those like super small perimeter lineups with Aaron Holiday on the floor. Lonzo was willing to move off ball. They kind of played him as like a pseudo, like stretch 4-y kind of player that would operate off of the wing a little bit more. Once he gets to the NBA, I don't know that that's going to work as well, I guess. Like, I think that there are systems where it can work, and he's, in that way, he's a very situational player, and, like, I agree with you. If he was next to a D'Angelo Russell, I think that would totally be awesome offensively. I have all sorts of defensive concerns, but I think that that would be the absolute best fit offensively. But say he goes to Phoenix, where he's forced to kind of create a little bit more in the pick and roll. I'm interested in how it would work. I just don't know for sure how it would work because, again, and this is worth mentioning, I've been told from people at UCLA, from talking to them, like, Lonzo kills it in mid-range in practice, and Lonzo, like, very clearly has everything you need in terms of touch and in terms of, you know, hitting floaters and everything like that in mid-range to where he's going to be fine in that range in the NBA. And if you believe that, he's the number 2 player in this draft for sure. I just need to see it, I guess. Like, I'm not 100% in on that happening.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the 2 elite qualities you can have as a lead guard, assuming you have vision.
Which he has, no doubt.
Yes, which of course he has, and he has that in spades. But he has that. But in the NBA, it's elite athleticism or it is shooting off the dribble. Those are the 2 main abilities that you need to be a high-level guard.
One other thing, too, I think he's kind of an overrated ball handler.
Totally agree.
Like, he doesn't keep his dribble super tight. Like, he does a lot of really cool stuff when he has a lot of space, but he doesn't keep his dribble tight often enough. And I think that just given his ridiculous hand-eye coordination and given his just unbelievable, basketball IQ, that it'll probably improve. But it needs to improve. Otherwise, he's going to be turnover prone, and it's going to be even harder for him to create space in that mid-range area at the NBA level.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just don't think he has a lot of shake. He doesn't have a lot of natural shake to his game. His handle, he has basic crossover and stuff. I don't see a lot of like advanced moves. Like he doesn't have Markel's like hang dribble kind of hesitation move.
Oh yeah.
There's not a lot of ways for him to break down defenses one-on-one, and it's not just the ability, it's the tentativeness. Like you saw this especially against Kentucky. He would get overt switches and he wouldn't attack like Willis or whatever. Like he could do a lot more to signify his confidence, getting his own shot in space. And the handle is definitely something that you have to have as an NBA league guard. That I would consider like a benchmark kind of. You have to have it. It's just the elite skills. When you look at the elite players, they're elite scorers, which means mostly shooting off the dribble. And the athleticism as far as finishing goes, nobody's going to compare anybody to Russell Westbrook. He's an outlier ET athlete. But like you see other guys like John Wall, Derrick Rose, like those guys get to the basket, they finish. I just don't see either one of those elite elements in Lonzo's game, which that's why it struggled to project him to the next level, man.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it's just really difficult to project what he's going to do. If you told me he is a 10-time All-Star because he just figures it out, because his basketball IQ is just so next level good, I would totally buy that. I think that his ceiling is as high as anyone's in this draft. I also think that there are a lot of realistic concerns that push his floor a little bit lower than the other elite players as well.
Well, it's just hard because I don't think we've ever seen, at least I haven't since I've been doing this, haven't seen a player quite like him before. He's just very divisive as far as what he can do. His strengths are really good. His weaknesses are kind of bad. And we just don't have anybody really to compare him to.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I did want to talk about Miles Bridges because I think that I felt like I was the only person who had Bridges at like number 8 on my board until I saw you say that you also had him at number 8 on your board whenever he decided to return to Michigan State for another year. What do you like so much about Miles Bridges' game?
Well, the really special NBA fours are guys that can handle the ball and play make. They bring that extra gear of playmaking to the next level. Draymond Green, of course, is the outlier, but this is the reason I like Dragan Bender in last year's draft is the guy can put the ball on the floor, he can pass on the move. He at least has a respectable handle. And Bridges can do that. Like, he finished 27 possessions as the pick-and-roll handler this year, and if you look at like the last 10 years of what I categorize as fours, he's number 1 there. Other guys you see, Aaron Gordon, Ben Simmons, like these are guys that can all handle the ball. And if you bring perimeter skills to a big position and you can shoot respectably, we don't really know that much about Bridges' shooting as far as is it really going to translate. I think he has enough confidence, and he's been consistent enough, like shooting a little bit off screens, a little bit off the dribble, even though he's not very good there, to at least project maybe like a average NBA shooter at the 4.
But I think respectability is the way to put it, yes.
That's a good point, yeah. I just think that he has the functional ability, the feel level to be a playmaking type in big spaces. He can attack closeouts, make an extra pass to the wing. He has that explosive athleticism finishing at the rim, which is huge. He has the speed to get there, which would separate him from like a Lauri Markkanen type, who I just don't think is going to be able to get in the lane and finish, like kind of like Frank Kaminsky. So basically, I think he just brings an added playmaking element that's really hard to find, and that really helps. I think the 4 position in the NBA right now is really where you differentiate yourself and how you approach the game, and I think he could bring an added element to an NBA team.
He's kind of like a little bit more skilled Jay Crowder to me in a way. Like, I don't think that he is a crazy off-ball or on-ball creator. Like I just don't think that skill is going to be amazing. Like, if you think that he's, from the way that you explained it there, you think he can be like a star, it sounds like, right?
No, I think he's more, I don't see the same thing. That's why I don't consider him a wing prospect. I think he's a big space player, so really he's attacking big spaces and closeouts. He's not going to like break guys down off the dribble on the wing. I don't see him as that kind of creator, but I think he's an Aaron Gordon type where he can pick and pop. If a guy closes out hard, he can burn by him, he can make a pass, he can make a couple dribble moves, and he can dribble the ball and maybe do some grab and go like Julius Randle stuff. I don't see him as like a star. I see him as a potential like star role player type.
Yeah, I think that he's kind of like super Jay Crowder, which is awesome considering Jay Crowder is like a top 60 player in the NBA?
Oh, yeah.
Like something like that, like in that range. He's going to be able to switch defensively 1 through 4. He has that low center of gravity. He's really strong throughout his lower half and throughout his hips to where I don't think that anyone's really going to be able to get position on him whenever he continues to fill out his frame and continues to get stronger, even though he already has like a professional level body. I agree with you, though, in terms of the playmaking ability. What he is to me is he's a super connecting player, right? Like, he is going to be able to let you play lineups where he plays the 3 and you can play a little bit bigger without losing a ton of skill and a ton of like switchability, or you can play him at the 4 and you can play super switchable, you can play super athletic. He's a lineup connector where you're going to be able to do a lot of different things with him. The 3, the key there is if he's going to be able to knock down shots. Like, I'm not the biggest believer in him being like a 39% shooter from 3 like he was this year, but I do think that he's at least shown me more than I expected at this stage. The thing with him is he has like a really weird thing where it feels like to me his feet are like parallel when he shoots the ball almost, and the release point's like a little bit weird where it seems like it's a little bit different every time that he shoots the basketball. That got a little bit better throughout the year, but I think that there's enough there to grow, and the key is confidence, like you said. If he's a confident jump shooter, he's going to be able to play the 3, and I think it's going to be fine.
That's fair. I'm a little more bearish on his defense. I think he's good defensively, and what he does bring is the physicality to play down a position at the 4. He can hold his own in the post, and he can rebound. And that's what really separates him from other guys. I think from like Josh Jackson, for instance. He can do that, and he can play down. I think he's willing to play down, which is really important. I don't know how good he is laterally. I think he's okay. I think he'll be fine in a lot of matchups in the NBA. I think if you get him on like a primary wing scorer, he's not going to be able to stick with those guys. But I think he's a little bit more position specific at the 4. I think that's where you're going to get his like playmaking value out of. I don't know how much he's going to bring to the wing, even though he can play there for spurts, obviously. If he had a 7-foot wingspan, it would just be. I would probably have him like top 5. It's just,
that's what I've said too. Yeah,
it's just you just don't like. We don't have. I don't think there's a starting 4 in the league right now with his measurables. And I know that the game's downsizing, but it's not downsizing enough as like people on Twitter think. Like,
he's like a 2 in today's NBA in terms of like height and wingspan.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have gone too far with like this narrative, like, small ball center Miles Bridges. It's like the league actually has to respond to that climate for it to work. Like if they play Steven Adams against him, you're screwed. Like it's not going to work. But I do think there is some position flexibility there. But I think mostly his value is going to come from a playmaking 4 perspective.
Yeah, like he's just not going to be able to protect the rim from a primary level.
Yes.
Like it's just not going to happen. He's not long enough. He's athletic, but it's just not going to be enough to be able to work that. So one thing I want to talk to you about is you seem very set on him as a 4. And yes. Michigan State obviously has Jaren Jackson coming in next year. They have Nick Ward returning, who is one of the most productive players in college basketball on a permanent basis. In my opinion, their best lineups are going to be with Miles Bridges at the 4 and one of those guys on the floor than both of those guys on the floor, Miles Bridges at the 3. What is your thought on that?
So that's precisely my thought. I think that whenever you can get away with downsizing in college and playing these kind of Miles Bridges, Jayson Tatum types at the 4, your offense is just going to be, much better. And you gotta have better spacing at the college level because it's already so rudimentary. Like there are different rules in the NBA, so you already have a more compact paint. So when you can space guys out, and Jackson can shoot a little bit. Like I don't understand how he can because his mechanics are so bad, but the ball goes in.
It's a really funky push shot for people.
Yeah, and he gets like no rotation on the shot at all, but it goes in. I mean, he shot over like 40%, I think, in high school. So if you put him and Bridges on the court at the 4 and 5, like you just have pristine spacing because you're getting maybe not pristine spacing, but you have good college spacing. So that's the way I would do it. But I think you are going to see a lot of lineups where Bridges is at the 3. And maybe you get more matchups like he's drawing. I mean, he probably already got the best wing defender from the other team multiple times this year, but maybe you get more like tight space, translatable positions to where you can see if he can operate in confined spaces, run pick and roll more. But for the most part, I think the success is going to come from the 4 spot.
I agree with you there. I would say that I think Nick Ward is still going to be a little bit more of an effective player than Jaren Jackson next year. Okay. I think Jaren Jackson's a better pro prospect. I think he's a better player, like in a vacuum. But in college basketball, Nick Ward's ability to just carve out space in every single way, and he's also like an underrated shot blocker. He had like an 8% block rate this year. And Tom Izzo is actually really good at kind of molding a defense around those big bodies inside, like he did it with Draymond Green, for instance, who Draymond was not like an awesome defensive player in college basketball, whatever people say. I know that he made like Big Ten's all defense or whatever, but he couldn't move in space, and he just had really good hands and the ability to block shots because Michigan State did an awesome job of insulating around him with athletes. They used to play Derek Nix at center, for instance. Like they're used to having these big bodies around the rim and molding a defense around them. So I think that whenever you take that into account with the fact that Nick Ward's an awesome offensive player who can create his own shot in the post basically at will against college players, that's not really going to translate to the NBA, but against college players, Nick Ward's going to be awesome in that way. I think that their best lineups are probably going to be without Jaren Jackson, which is a weird thing to say whenever Jaren Jackson is now morphing into this like potential top 14 pick in the NBA draft.
Yeah, when I think about college, I'm always thinking through the lens of NBA draft. I never really fixate on like specific college examples like Ward excelling in that situation. If like they're not a prospect and they don't project to the next level, I usually dismiss it. So that's good information to have.
Yeah, no, it's going to be funny. Like I think that a lot of people are going to be a little bit disappointed with Jaren Jackson next year, unless like Tom Izzo. Actually, you know what? They're probably both going to play like 20 minutes a game because Nick Ward, didn't play a crazy amount of minutes this year throughout a decent portion of the year because foul trouble is a thing that happens for young big men. So we'll see if he can fix that problem. But if he doesn't, then more Jaren Jackson, and I think that everyone's going to be happy there. The last thing that we want to talk about, who are some of the underrated guys that you like in this draft? Maybe a Juwan Evans, maybe a guy that's in the second round. Who's someone that you really like?
Sindarius Thornwell is the guy for me. He was the guy. I didn't see a lot of him before the tournament, and I went back and ended up watching a lot of his tape. Really impressive. I think doesn't project as like maybe an impact defender, but I think he's going to be a positive defender at the next level. And I am a believer in his shot. I know he's not like a knockdown shooter or anything, but he has simple mechanics. When he gets squared up to the basket, he's actually a pretty effective shooter off the catch. He's not going to give you much in maybe secondary pick and roll sets, even though what I like about him is every year you see like an equal kind of play type distribution. He actually ran more pick and rolls at the beginning of his career in college, and like over time he became more of an off-ball guy. Like this year he was used a lot as the roll man, as like pick and pops and stuff like that. We saw that in the tournament, but he's a guy I can just project, maybe 3-and-D wing. He's got a great frame, and he really competes his ass off. Like I've never seen a guard like attack the offensive glass as like ridiculously as he does. I mean, he's all over it. So I think he brings a lot of intangible factors, effort especially to that wing position. I think if you get him in the second round, I think that's a steal because I can see him playing a rotation spot on a good team. What about you?
Yeah, I have Thornwell at 36. That's really,
okay.
I'm pretty high on him, I think, compared to where the general consensus is as well. The concerns there, and this is something that I've been kind of talking to NBA people about. I wrote about Thornwell for Vice, like whenever they were in the second round of the NCAA tournament. The name that came up was KJ McDaniels, in that he is a shooter that might not translate to the 3-point line being 4 feet further back on the wing. Or 3 feet further back, I'm sorry now. Because if you look, like every single one of his 3-point shots were right in front of the line. He has like kind of that funky slow release. They're clean mechanics and they're simple mechanics, but they're slow mechanics as well. And I think the concern is like if he's kind of moving back that far, whenever you have guys kind of in his face, that could be an issue going forward. Also, he played a lot of small ball for them this year and got a lot of advantageous offensive athletic matchups where he could drive to the rim and get to the foul line. He's not going to be able to do that in the NBA all that often, even though he has like decent length. Like it's funny, like he's actually probably got a higher standing reach than Miles Bridges, who we were talking about playing the 4. But having said that, he's still going to be more of a 2-3 in my opinion. And I just don't know how good of a athlete he's going to be in terms of attacking closeouts and consistently getting to the rim like on a strong basis. I do think the defense is going to translate. Like anyone who plays at that high of an effort level and has that kind of lateral quickness and length, I think he's going to be relatively okay on that end. Like I think that that's where he's going to make his money if he makes the league. But I think that you take all those skills together and you're right. Like he's a very interesting prospect. I think that I'm kind of harping on the negatives as to why I have him at 36 versus like having him like at 26. Like I would imagine you probably have him like in your 20s, right?
Yeah, I'd probably even have him a little bit higher. I rank guys differently. I don't like some guys like Tyler Lydon and stuff. A lot of people would have ahead of him, based on like a projectable skill set. And I just don't value certain players as much as other guys. So Thornwell would probably, I just stopped ranking guys after a certain point too. So there's a lot of guys that I don't even get to. But Thornwell, he would rank high for me. Probably, 20s.
Yeah, like Tyler Lydon. The thing with him is that his shot just genuinely projects. Like
yes.
he can shoot like all the way out to like 27 feet right now. And that's really valuable. But I think that you're right. Just a quick number on Tyler Lydon, his 1.175 point per possession on jump shots. That's second among high major players that are at least 6'9" or taller to Lauri Markkanen. So like, he's a really, really good jump shooter. I agree with you though, in that he doesn't have a lot of positional versatility, and that's a little bit scary in today's game.
Yeah, I think stretch 4 archetypes are kind of, they still have a role. Ryan Anderson, you see that with Houston. I think Tyler Lydon, guys like TJ Leaf, they have a projectable role. I just tend to value those guys that are, basically one position guys at the 4 who aren't going to defend. Unless you're like an absurd playmaker, unless you're Kevin Love or like obviously Dirk Nowitzki is probably the number 1 guy of all time at this. Unless you're that kind of player, I'm not going to value as highly.
Yeah. I mean, the guy that I've been high on throughout the process is Frank Mason. Anyone who can shoot off the dribble like he can, anyone who can shoot off the catch like he can, and who can defend at the point of attack despite his size, I think that guy can play in the NBA regardless.
Yeah, I have him as a 5th guard. I've been kind of singing that praise too. I think you see what Yogi Ferrell's doing. I don't know it's not like a direct comparison, but you see what he does in Dallas' system. I think Frank Mason is an NBA caliber player for sure. It's just, I just don't know like how to really value him that much, but I definitely think that he should be drafted, I guess.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Like, that's where I'm at. Like, that guy should be drafted. One guy that you're a little bit lower on.
Lauri Markkanen for sure. I know we're going to disagree on De'Aaron Fox, But
I'll have you on like at another point to talk about De'Aaron Fox, because that'll be a longer conversation.
For sure. And I think with Lowry, I get the strengths. He's an outlier elite shooter off multiple different platforms. He can shoot off the dribble like I don't think I've seen a 7-footer do other than Dirk, really. He doesn't have the same fluidity, of course, as Dirk, but he can actually like attack a closeout, a couple dribbles, and shoot off the bounce. And you just don't see that. His only comparable really is like Frank Kaminsky is like junior and senior year. He can shoot off screens at a high level. His shooting is going to translate. The other problem is he basically plays like a 7-foot shooting guard. And for bigs, I want bigs to contribute rebounding and defense, because that's where you're deriving a lot of your value as a team as far as team defense goes, protecting the rim with bigs and your point of attack defense, guarding lead guards. And I just think he's going to be a major disappointment on that end. I know he can slide 1 or 2 slides. He's not like he's decently mobile, but my issue with him is rim protection. Like when he's backpedaling, guys can just elevate right over the top of him. He's not even a threat there. So I just think that he's going to be a valuable weapon. I'm higher on him than some of the skeptics, because I think as a rotation player, even if he's the third big, there are going to be some matchups where he has really, really good value, kind of like Kelly Olynyk was with Boston Celtics, as far as having, if you have that perimeter defense infrastructure, he can be a valuable player. But I don't think like this top like 5 pick, this top like even 8 pick, I don't understand that. But yeah, I guess that's the one guy I'm a little bit lower on.
Yeah, I have him at like 11 on my board. Like maybe 10 now that Bridges is out. But like I'm not like crazy high on him either. I think that the one thing is like he could genuinely be the best shooter at his position in the NBA at one point. Like, and he probably will be, to be honest. Like that's incredibly valuable in today's NBA. The key is going to be he limits the way you can build your roster around him. And that's a very difficult way to have to build a roster in a lot of ways. Like the fact that you're looking for a very specific skill set, like you basically have to play him next to someone like a Serge Ibaka, who can occasionally, play the 4 and 5 depending on what the matchup is, and block shots at the weak side of the rim and be like a rim protector,
Exactly. And I think his main value, like if he could play the 5, that's where he's going to derive his main value. Then you're pulling out the opposing team's rim protector, and that's where you get that elite shooting input. And I don't see him ever be able to play the 5 for the most part. I mean, there are certain matchups he will be able to situationally play for sure, but he's not going to be able to start there against the majority of the league. He's just not going to be able to protect the rim, and he's not physical enough. So, I mean, when you talk about like his real shooting impact would be maximized at a certain position where he's not really well equipped to play full time. So I think that's my main concern with as far as his strengths translating.
Yeah. The guy that I'm a little bit lower on is Ike Onigbo.
Okay.
I'm not a big fan of like major projects, I guess is the way to put it. I just don't think that they derive enough rookie scale contract value. Like even a guy like Bebe, who has turned out okay for Toronto, like he's turned into a serviceable rotation big man, they're going to get like 0 contract value out of him.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. With guys like that, you automatically think Tristan Thompson, of course, and I just don't know how the guy's wired. That's something like you have to get through interviews and stuff like that. How good is his work ethic? Is he really willing to be like this like superstar garbage man, get all over the glass, just play with high intensity all the time? Because you have to put that guy next to a bunch of different playmakers. Like that's the only way you can derive that kind of like lob catching with like a pristine floor. So yeah, I get that, and I think that his offensive game is definitely far away if he ever materializes into anything more than like a lob threat.
That and like he moves solidly. Like he's good for a guy that is 6'10" with a 7'5" wingspan in terms of like lateral mobility, but he's also not like a crazy lateral mover either.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean, like that's where Thompson derives most of his value is space defense. I mean, we see that he can switch on the guards, contain, and like that's the kind of guy. If he could be that, I would have interest in him. Maybe even like as high as the 3rd big in this class. But I don't think he's going to be that kind of player.
Yeah. I mean, like Jordan Bell is probably like the most direct comparable to Tristan Thompson. And Jordan has a lot of other issues because his body's like relatively lean and he doesn't rebound nearly at the level that Tristan does because he doesn't have the length that Tristan does. But at the same time, like you can see the shot blocking instincts and the lateral mobility in terms of being able to switch out onto like ones for a couple dribbles even and deal with them. So, I like Jordan Bell, but I think there are obviously a lot of questions about him as well. The reason I bring him up is that he officially declared for the draft today after Shams Charania hit that this weekend saying that he was going to declare, and Jordan called it fake news, and then he decided to declare anyway.
Gotta love that.
That was interesting. And I think Jordan's actually a really good dude, having talked to him now at the last two Final Fours and the Elite Eight out in LA last year. Really good dude, really smart dude. That was just a weird situation that happened over the course of that time. But Cole, do you have anything else you want to chat about before we get out of here?
Oh, quickly, what's your opinion on Malik Monk? Where do you have him ranked?
He's very situational. I have him at number 7 on my board right now. I will probably move him down to number 8, reasonably soon, just because I have Jonathan Isaac at 8. And it's becoming more and more difficult for me to kind of see why Malik Monk should be ahead of Isaac, just because, like, Isaac's going to be a killer defender. He's going to have positional utility like we see from the Bucks, who are playing basketball right now, for instance. They've found a way to make those guys work and make them functional offensively. The key with Isaac is that only 16.1% of his offense came in what I call creation situations, right? So that's like isolation, pick and roll, and post-ups in the half court. Yeah. That's like half as much as Miles Bridges is, for instance. And you could say as much as you want about like Xavier Rutan-Mays and Dwayne Bacon taking a lot of possessions, but I think a lot of it too is mentality. Like he just does not necessarily, at least from what we've seen so far, have the like killer mentality that you hope for from like a top 5 pick, which is what his skills really say that he could be.
Yeah, he can dribble. I just think the ball slows him down. He doesn't have a lot of burst attacking the basket. But yeah, he's going to derive a lot of his value defensively. Getting back to Monk, though, I think that we're in lockstep there as well. We're agreeing on way too much stuff this year. But I think I had him 7 or 8. He's usually an archetype that I'm a little dicey on, just because if he's not an elite shooter, that's what you're banking on. You're not banking on a really good shooter. He has to be elite. And there are some indicators. I mean, he's like the most high-volume, off-screen, pull-up jump shooter, like basically of all freshmen that I've seen. Like if you go back 10 years, he has like, and that's what he needs to be. He needs to be that kind of scheme-changing presence, run him off screens. I'm not going to compare him to JJ Redick, even though he can do more off the dribble than JJ can. But like he has to be that kind of gravitational force.
Can he?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think he's a better.
JJ's pretty decent off the dribble now. I mean, back then maybe not, but like JJ can do some stuff off the dribble.
Yeah, I think Malik has a better first step for sure. I don't see a lot of shake. I see some similarities, and I think Malik's slashing ability is higher just because he's a better athlete. He's going to be. I think he's going to be a better finisher. But yeah, more towards when they came out as far as projecting. But he has to be that kind of. I'm not going to compare him to JJ as a shooter because JJ is literally one of the all-time elite shooters. But that's the kind of guy. If you're going to recoup like high value from Malik, he has to be. And, you know, those guys are always tough to call. Like, Jamal Murray was a great college shooter, and he's like, 33% this year? So it's like, it takes a little bit to acclimate. But if Malik doesn't shoot, like, an elite level, you're just not getting a lot of fallback. You don't have defense to fall back on. And I think that your ranking of Isaac ahead of him is right on point. That's what I have, just because I think that at least Isaac has something you can fall back on.
Yeah, the lower-end outcome of Isaac is so much higher than the lower-end outcome of Monk. Yeah, I agree with you. I wrote everything that you just said at Vice, like in February or so. Like I am in the same boat as you are with Malik. Like there are absolutely indicators that he is an incredible shooter. He was 25th out of 2,577 Division I players in guarded catch and shoot jump shot attempts this time. That's a 63.6 effective field goal percentage on those shots. It's insane that you're able to have that kind of ability at a school like Kentucky where you're going against high major competition day in, day out. But again, the margin for error is 0 for him. And that's what makes finding a comparable player or an archetype so difficult. And I think that that's what's so scary about him.
Yeah, and I think, but if you're ever going to invest in somebody like this, like the undersized guy who doesn't have a ton of positional versatility, you wish he was a better point of attack defender, because then you really have something to fall back on. If he could really defend lead guards, he has the athleticism. I'm just not sure if he has the motor. He's not great laterally. He's pretty good. He is workable. He's workable there. He's just not going to be able to switch defensively very much. He's going to get exploited. He's one of those guys in the playoffs where I think without like major strength addition or like reasonable strength addition, he's going to be a defensive liability in the playoffs. And you can live with that if he's giving you that like +4 offensive value. But is he going to give you that? That's the question.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Anything else you want to chat about here?
Man, I think I've pulled out all stops. I think, we'll get to De'Aaron Fox next time because that's going to be a longer conversation.
That's going to be like a 30-minute conversation probably, because that is the thing that we definitely most disagree on. Cole, do you want to plug everything that you want to plug again for the people that are listening?
Sure. I write for The Step Back pretty frequently, and we're going to get into a lot more draft talk and projection analysis stuff, team fits. We do player breakdowns there. I haven't done one in a little bit. I did one on Tyler Lydon about 2 weeks ago when he declared, but I'll try to get some more up. And we have our own draft podcast, What's on Draft. You can follow us on Twitter there, where I talk draft usually once a week with my co-hosts Mark Whittington and Javier Pesquera. So check us out at What's on Draft.
Yeah, Cole does a great job basically everywhere he writes. He's a really smart guy. I'm very glad. The first time I had you on the podcast, like last year, you had like under 1,000 followers. I'm glad that you have like built that up to where you have like 5,000 followers now. People are starting to like kind of see that you know what you're talking about, and that makes me happy that you have more eyeballs on you now.
It's all you, man. It's like a testament to that podcast. That was the beginning of whatever this is. So
I don't know about that, but this has been the Game Theory Podcast. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Stitcher, Android, anywhere that you can get podcasts. I think we're up on right now. We would appreciate some ratings, reviews, subscriptions, any way, small way that you can support the podcast. We would appreciate it over at CLNS Radio, where again, you can, subscribe to all the great shows over there. Real GM Radio, B-Ball Breakdown, Celtics Beat. There are a lot of really great shows that are going to be breaking down the NBA playoffs. Speaking of which, on Friday, I'm going to talk about the NBA playoffs a little bit. I don't know who the guest is going to be yet, but I'm sure I'll have someone great on. We, there are a lot of really smart NBA writers out there who are doing great content. I was glad to have one on today with Cole, and I'm sure I'll have another one on Friday. But until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.